Welcome to Voices in the Void, where we traverse the shadowy realms of the unexplained. A romantic Valentine's Day hike turns terrifying when a chilling discovery is made below a snowy cliff. Can you outrun the horror when the victim becomes the monster? Watch now to see what happens next. The Cantal Cliffs are a very popular tourist destination. Only in winter does the situation improve. Slightly the conditions are a bit better. If it snows there are even fewer visitors. I usually only go there in winter. I live not far from the cliffs, and I really can't stand the crowded summer crowds. My friend Sarah had never been to the Cantwell Cliffs before. Last Valentine's Day, we decided to take a trip there together. We were both on holiday at the time, and we both didn't want to spend the holiday alone. Just as we were preparing to set off, the weather forecast told us there might be a blizzard that day, and there was even a chance of extreme weather. We considered whether or not to cancel the trip, but we had prepared crampons to attach to our shoes, and Sarah was driving her Jeep. So we decided to go for it. We didn't want a few little snowflakes to ruin our trip that we had planned for weeks. When we arrived at the scenic area, the scene before us did not disappoint. The parking lot was completely empty. This was a sight I had never seen before. Although it was 2 p.m., there wasn't a single car here, and not even any traces of vehicle tracks. Considering that it was still snowing, this place could become very dangerous in a few hours, so perhaps we shouldn't stay here too long. But the scenery here was really too beautiful. Sarah, I said to her, no matter how many times you come here in the future, you may never encounter a situation like this, where no one else is around. We began to walk further into the mountains, and although it was still snowing heavily, I've never seen such beautiful scenery. The branches of every tree were covered in white snow, and the forest was filled with pine trees, making the entire mountain look vibrant green even in winter. If I didn't know that we were in the Midwest of America, I might have thought I was in Canada, or somewhere further north like Alaska. Even there were signs around. We still took a while to find the entrance to the trail. The entrance was right at the edge of the cliff, and once we entered, there was a steep staircase that cut through the rock crevices. At the edge of the staircase, there were a few footprints already covered in snow, and even on the very first step, there was a footprint. However, the person who left those footprints should have quickly realized that today's weather wasn't suitable for hiking. Are you sure you can do this? I asked Sarah. Of course, she said. It's nothing, it's a piece of cake. Although we had crampons on our shoes, it was still difficult to walk on the steps. The ice and snow had solidified on the already weathered, narrow steps, turning the entire path into a slope that went straight down. If it weren't for the spikes on our shoes, we wouldn't have been able to walk on the steps at all. When Sarah reached the bottom of the steps, she slipped and fell, sliding down a meter or two before getting back on her feet. Piece of cake, huh? I asked Sarah, and she just smiled, brushing the blood off her pants. This made me reconsider whether to continue the hike, and nearly suggested turning back. But then I thought, we had already made it this far, and we had already passed the hardest part of the whole route. So why not keep going? We started walking along the mountain path, passing a few waterfalls along the way. Unless it was raining heavily, most of the waterfalls here were just trickling. But in winter, the flowing water freezes into chunks of ice, creating a majestic illusion of a roaring waterfall. Sometimes the ice touches the ground, and other times, it forms dangerous shapes like stalagmites, leaving behind a bubble-shaped blue ice column at the bottom. I took a few photos with my camera, as I rarely had the chance to take pictures of this place without tourists. Of course, a few photos inadvertently caught Sarah in them too. Don't you think this path by the cliff is a bit slippery? Sarah asked me. Well, there's only one path here, so we have to take this route, I replied. Don't worry, this path won't get too close to the cliff. If you feel okay with it, I'll walk along with you. Sarah isn't from the Midwest, so she's not very familiar with this place. When we first started hiking, I even had to assure her that we didn't need to bring bear spray, or wear rattlesnake boots. Just bringing a bottle of water would be enough. This forest we were in wouldn't present any dangers. At most, we might encounter a few camps set up by drifters. Sometimes she would ask questions about urban legends, like whether she needed to bring her electronic phenomenon recorder, or if we would encounter Bigfoot here. I told her I didn't believe in any of that, until the sun was about to set. I started to believe a little bit when I heard the screams of animals I didn't recognize in so-called supernatural phenomena. Anyway, we stumbled up the cliffside path and walked up for a while, gradually surpassing the treetops that were just above us. Over the years I've walked this path countless times in the winter. I always feel like I'm standing higher. The bare branches allow us to see the cliffside scenery more easily, but we didn't venture close to the cliff on the side of the mountain path. There was an open-air wooden cabin overlooking the cliff. We sat inside for a while, looking at the graffiti on the walls while eating oat bars. Just as we were putting our water bottles back in our backpacks, we heard a sound in front of us. There was a very faint cry for help. I almost thought I had imagined it, but the sound repeated itself, and the shouting was louder than before. Help, then another. Either it came from in front of us. The sound was coming from the bottom of the cliff. We stared wide-eyed and looked at each other. I moved forward a little, stopping a few meters from the edge of the cliff. In the winter, it's best not to get too close to the edge of the cliff, because it's hard to tell where is rock and where is actually snow. If you're not careful, you'll fall off the cliff with the snow pile. Is anyone down there? Sarah shouted. Is anyone there? The voice replied, please help me, let me do it, I said to Sarah, then grabbed a branch, lay on the ground, and leaned forward with support, while poking the snow in front with the branch, to make sure the ground ahead was solid. I was lying on the edge of the cliff, looking down. At the bottom of the cliff, lay a man. As soon as I saw him, I immediately realized that his condition was very bad. He was lying on the ground. His hands and feet were all twisted. I didn't see any blood on the snow, but that doesn't explain anything. He was wearing a light green coat and what looked like tattered and dirty pants. When I saw him, I gasped, but immediately after, steadying my voice, I said, don't worry, we'll get someone to rescue you. Wait, he shouted, don't leave me alone here. I looked back at Sarah. He said, well, I can go. His physical fitness is obviously better than mine, and he often runs for exercise. At this kind of critical time, he should be able to get back faster. I don't want to stay here myself, but we can't leave the person at the bottom of the cliff unattended. You should get a signal on the way back. Put your phone on windmode. That way, when you receive a signal, there will be a lot of text messages and email notification sounds. He nodded. If you don't get a signal on the mountain path, then drive away from here. Maybe you'll get a signal when you drive to the first hill. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and said, I'll be right back. Okay, go, I said. Then he ran off. Don't worry, I shouted down the cliff. I was still here while Sarah and I were talking. The wind around us had stopped. I could hear what he was saying more clearly. Thank God, and thank you, kind person. My friend has gone to get help, I told him then. Although I myself didn't think so, I still said to him, you'll be okay. I reached my hand underneath my stomach and pushed aside a few tree branches to sit down on the cold, snowy ground. When I laid down again to look down, I could see more clearly the man's condition. His right hand was bent back, making it appear extremely short. It seemed like it had broken from the upper arm, and then bent inward twice, creating a terrifying twisted shape. The other hand was pinned behind his back, and his legs looked very strange. The knees of both legs were bent in the opposite direction, but he could still speak now. That's good news. My gaze fell on the snow around him. The marks in the snow looked somewhat chaotic, as if he had previously tried to twist his body and crawl around. What's your name? He asked. My name is Daphne, I told him. And you? I pulled my hat down a bit. After I stopped moving, the cold feeling became even more intense. But fortunately, the wind had stopped now. Daphne repeated, ignoring my question. He then asked, Daphne, are you up there all alone? Yes, I replied. My friend has gone to get help. I tried to reassure him, but I had already told him that once. This made me feel a bit uneasy. That's great, he said. Then he said softly, that's really good. How long have you been down there? I asked him. A long time, he said. I thought to myself, isn't that just stating the obvious? He must have been lying there for at least a day, because there were no other tracks from vehicles in the parking lot. Then I suddenly thought, wait a minute, where is this person's car? I have been here a very long time. Daphne, he said, interrupting my thoughts. I pressed my body as close to the ground as possible to avoid the sudden cold wind that had started blowing through the forest. I knew the temperature was already quite low, but when he uttered my name, the tone of his voice made the surroundings feel even colder. I immediately felt a bit guilty for this thought. He was clearly delirious, but anyway, there was a deeply unsettling feeling about him. "I'm so lonely here," he said softly. And there was another thing that puzzled me. Why were there no footprints on the steps at the beginning of the path? "All right, don't worry," I said, and looked down from the edge of the cliff again. "Someone is here to keep you company now." Yes, he gently moved his body. "Someone's here to keep me company." I was about to tell him not to move, but my gaze was locked onto the snow around him. The traces around him did not seem to be caused by him crawling around. There was snow. There was a trail of footprints extending from his side, and leading into the side of the dense forest. Then the man sat up. I widened my eyes in shock. I suddenly realized something terrifying. He hadn't fallen to the bottom of the cliff. He had walked over here on his own. I lay on the ground, trying to figure out what was going on. He must have had some purpose to distract me. I suddenly remembered those horrifying urban legends. Some people encounter a woman with a baby by the roadside, or a broken-down car. They will flag down passing cars, seeking help. But it's actually to divert the attention of passersby, so that their accomplices can rush out from the forest, or block the road. I turned to look behind me, thinking I would see someone approaching me. But there was no one behind me. I turned back, ready to stand up and run, but what I saw in front of me stunned me in place. The man stood up, but the direction of his knees, both legs were bent forward in front of him. Then he stretched out his arms. I thought his hands were broken before. But that was just to disguise the trajectory of how long his arms really were. His two hands kept getting longer until they were fully extended. At the end his arms appeared the palms that were previously covered by the snow. His fingers were long and had black tips. I guessed those were his claws. He started to approach the cliff face. Because the bottom of the cliff was concave, I couldn't see that person anymore. I heard a terrible scraping sound. After a few quiet seconds I saw his head emerge from behind a rock on the cliff. "Peekaboo," he said in a playful tone. He was climbing up the cliff. I stood up and desperately ran on the snow. An ice that feeling was like running in a dream. Every step I took would sink into the snow or slip on the ice. I ran very slowly, even in the best case scenario. I wouldn't be able to shake that person off. Even the wind was working against me, the cold wind, at least 30 kilometers per hour, was aiming me, trying to push me towards that terrible cliff edge. When I heard footsteps on the snow, I knew he had climbed up the cliff. I ran a few more steps forward, and then like a girl in a horror movie I slipped on that damn ice. Before I could get up I felt a pair of claws grab my back. My heart was pounding violently, but when he said, "I got you, Duvernay," my heart beat even faster. He easily dragged me back. I kicked and screamed, desperately trying to break free, but it had no effect on this creature. Whatever it was, his claws dug deep into both sides of my body. Every kick would make them dig in deeper, but I still didn't stop. He dragged me past the cabin. I tried to reach out and grab the wooden post of the cabin. As we got closer and closer to the edge of the cliff, I dug my fingernails deep into the ice on the ground, but it was useless. That creature carried me on his shoulder. Preparing to climb down the cliff, my feet were dangling in the air. I used all my strength to grab a small tree growing on the edge of the cliff. "Stop it, Duvernay. I won't let you fall," he said. Pulling me, I looked at him. This is the first time I really saw his face clearly. He looked like a human, but his skin was unusually pale. His eyes were an almost pure white ice blue. His arms were very cold. He was wearing clothes that were too small for him, with some small blue flowers embroidered on the shell. There were holes on the side and front of the clothes, as if he had been torn before. Were they torn by his claws? I thought to myself. I frantically kicked the ice upwind while holding onto the branch tightly. Maybe it was luck, maybe it was the blessing of some god. The ice above my head shattered. That creature looked up. A look of what seemed like surprise appeared on his expressionless face. And he fell off the cliff. He let go of the hand that was holding me, instinctively raising his arms, trying to protect himself with those terrible claws. I desperately grabbed the branch. The falling ice was less than a few centimeters away from me, huge blue icicles, and that terrible monster fell together to the bottom of the cliff. I prayed that they would smash into that monster, piercing its terrible and deformed body. I used the most agile movements of my life to climb to the edge of the cliff, and then ran. My movements were still slow, but now the wind had weakened slightly. I didn't hear any sound behind me, but I still didn't slow down. After running on the ice for 5 to 10 minutes, I saw Sarah. She was limping, trying to climb the steps. "Sarah!" I screamed. She turned her head with a somewhat embarrassed expression on her face. I guess she must have walked too fast and sprained her ankle. I hurried over and said to her, "We have to leave here immediately." "What about that guy?" Sarah asked. "Didn't she say she didn't want to be left alone there?" Then a solemn expression appeared on Sarah's face. She isn't. She's not dead." I paused. "At least I don't think she's dead. I'll tell you when we get in the car. We have to go now." "Low belly." She stopped. "What do you mean?" I thought about whether to tell her the truth. I really thought about it, but doing so would slow us down. Daijianzo hui told my woman to sudo, and I needed her to move quickly, so I told her a more believable explanation, an explanation that I had thought of the first time. "I saw those footprints right away, Sarah. She wasn't hurt. She was lying there to distract us. She walked to that spot herself. I think there might be other people hiding in the forest. I think she wanted us to stay put for some purpose." Oh damn. It Sarah understood even though her ankle was injured, but we still fled from there as fast as possible. I was practically pushing her up the last flight of stairs. I don't know why that thing didn't chase us. I think she must have been dead. Or at least injured after we successfully escaped the mountain path. I was in the driver's seat. It started snowing again, making it very difficult to drive. I had never driven Sarah's car before. Not only were there many curves on the way out, but it was also easy to skid. I almost drove off the road twice. I wasn't afraid of a car accident. What I was afraid of was, if we got stuck on the side of the road, what kind of thing would come chasing after us from behind? I took Sarah to the hospital and reported it to the police. At the hospital I wish I could do something more to tell others about the situation, but who could I even talk to about this kind of thing? Talk about something completely impossible. I spent a long time searching the history of this area, searching for any information about a creature similar to the one I saw, ghosts or anything else. But I found nothing. I also searched for previous deaths that had occurred there, wanting to know if there were any men who looked like him, who had fallen off the cliff. But I still didn't find any clues. However, to be honest, in the wilderness anything can happen. Maybe it was a master animal that moved the person's body, but if that thing was a ghost, then how did it manage to climb up the cliff to grab people? I originally wanted to stop here, forget about it, and continue living my normal life, as long as I never went hiking again. In the following week I saw a news report. Someone had died at Canterville Cliff, falling from the top of the cliff. What's even more terrifying is that person went hiking at Canterville Cliff on the same day as us, when I checked my phone before bed. This message suddenly popped up on my screen. When I saw the headline of the news, I immediately turned on the lights in the room and then checked if the doors of the house were locked. A girl went hiking during a blizzard. The time was about when we left the cliff. An hour later, she was an experienced hiker who had climbed many mountains and explored places several times more dangerous than this. Her family all felt that she was unlikely to make such a mistake. Then I saw the girl's injuries in the news. Her right arm had multiple fractures. Both of her knee joints were bent in the opposite direction. Yes, I know this might just be a coincidence, but that's not the worst part. She was wearing a green coat, but her families said the girl didn't have such a coat, although there were no photos of the coat in the news. But according to the description in the article, that coat had blue flowers embroidered on it, on both sides of the girl's body. There were many puncture wounds. Her injuries were so severe that the police even released a preliminary autopsy report, and believed that this could be a case of intentional harm. But in the end the coroner determined that the girl fell on her own, because her real cause of death was hypothermia. The end of the article interviewed the girl's brother. She was saying what a terrible event this was. Her sister must have been at the bottom of the cliff for several hours before freezing to death. She said, "I can't help but think how painful it must have been for her to be there alone for so long. How painful it must have been." But she was wrong. I think the girl wasn't alone at the time. I think when she was dying, lying in the snow, by her side there was a terrifying creature. I clearly remember that thing, what it said at the time. "I won't let you fall." I can't help but wonder whether the girl fell on her own, or whether that creature grabbed her to the bottom of the cliff and then deliberately broke her bones. After a while this article was removed from the internet. The police believed the girl didn't die from intentional harm, and her family also didn't want that overly detailed autopsy report to be circulated everywhere. Local news like this actually doesn't have much reach. If I hadn't happened to see this article that week, I probably would never have known about it. This made me curious how many unreported deaths have actually occurred there, how many people died in that place from the same injuries. Finally, I came up with a theory that creature recovered soon after Sarah and I left, and was also able to grab another person. She should have been able to catch up to us. Because we were running too slowly at the time, we need to find any legends or sightings about this thing. There's no information at all. If she lives in that area, hunting nearby, or existing in that place in some other form, logically there should be some clues. I think maybe she only appears when there few people around, touching the small mirrors in the mountains, looking for those who are alone. Maybe she only hunts those who are hiking alone, those who like her walk alone in the mountains. I think at least on that day there was a dying girl who kept her company for a few hours. She was no longer alone, and that girl was the same, Yatoyan Rusa. Thank you for journeying with us into the unknown. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, subscribe, and tap the notification bell to stay updated.